Welcome, everyone. Welcome. So, Farron Manuel here, curator and foundation director at Black Art in America. I want to welcome you all to the current exhibit, Landscapes for Richard Mayhew. We're celebrating Richard Mayhew for his centennial. So this is an artist who's been very active as a landscape painter and transforming the American scene since his early career in the 1940s, and to have him around now and to honor him with this special exhibition. We're honored that he knows about the show. He sent thank you notes to us, and he's aware and engaged. Today we're going to have a presentation, Navigating the Art World, by Dean Mitchell, and I want to share a bit about Dean Mitchell's bio. Renowned artist, known for his landscape paintings, figurative works, and also still life works. Dean Mitchell was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he was raised in Quincy, Florida. He is a graduate of the Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio, and has been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, and also Art News. Looking forward to hearing what Dean has to share with us today. And we have 4 of his works in the current exhibition, and to be a contemporary artist focusing on the landscape space and still innovating the American scene. We're happy to be hosting Dean here at Black Art in America. So without further ado, Dean Mitchell. And also, could everyone silence your phones if you have your ringers on? That would be really helpful, because we're recording.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you all for coming out to hear what I have to say about my work and my upbringing and how I got started in art. I was born in Pittsburgh. I'm going to give you a little bit about my background because I think it is reflected in my work. I am a child of an affair. My mother was pregnant and fled our small town, and she gave birth to me in Pittsburgh, a place for unwed mothers. I just found out that after my mother just passed a few years ago. And my grandmother, in the middle, did not know that she was pregnant. She only told her brother, and her brother told his mother, and when she came home without me, she said, "Where is the child? And wherever he is, you go back and you get him, and you bring him home, and we will raise him." And so that was my grandmother. And my mother is on the far left here, and this is my auntie, my mother's sister. My grandmother had 4 children. My mother was the first of her 4 children to get an education, and she was not for me going into the arts. So the black man can't make a living selling pictures in America. This is impossible. You have to understand, I was born in 1957 and growing up in the rural South where we couldn't even sit in restaurants and do certain things. So my mother did not foresee the possibility of this. My grandmother, on the other hand, said to leave him alone and let him pursue what he wants to do. And that's what I have done. This is a picture of my maternal grandfather. My grandmother told me a lot of stories about my grandfather. He died when I was a year old. And he died in a way that is very heart-wrenching. He was staggering on the street. The police officer thought he was drunk, and he was having a mild heart attack. They threw him in a jail cell. He died of a massive heart attack. And at that time, when they got me, we were living in what they call, I guess, a shotgun house or quarters. And the county decided to give her some money to keep her quiet, and so she bought a home on Clark Street, the little block home where I was raised. This is a photograph of a lot of my friends and I at one of our first art competitions in a place called Marianna, Florida. this gentleman here, his name is Pete Henson. That's Tim Myrick, Tom Harris, and I don't remember who the young lady is. And that's me on the very, very end with braids in my hair. I had an afro, so I would often get it braided. My mother hated it. But this is really how I got interested in competitions. But the gentleman I showed you in the dark brown shirt on the far right here, he was the one who was very, very talented, very, very gifted, and the community really supported him. He was always winning first place in different prizes and different things. And the white community at that time became very enthralled with him because he was winning against professionals when he was a teenager. I would get what we call an honorable mention or a merit award, but he was really the one that they focused on mostly. And so Tom Harris, the white gentleman in the photograph, he was the one that took us around and introduced us to these different art fairs. And at that time, we were the only black kids at these types of events. So it was new for us. This is Tom Harris and his wife Betty. This is at the Schomburg in New York. I did a book with Maya Angelou on jazz. It was the Limited Edition Book Club. I flew he and his wife out to the opening because they really wanted so desperately to meet her, and they could not afford it. And so, because they were among some of the very few who would step out of their community to help us, and by the way, him helping us during that time period was not a very welcoming thing a lot of times. So he was met with some obstacles that I learned later and called all kinds of things. I want to pray everybody with a broad brush, but there were very, very few people who would cross over the line and help an artist of color or a person of color during that time period. This one I put in, I just gave this lecture at FSU at the Jim Moran Center. And this gentleman, Emery Johnson and Dorothy, shows up, and after my lecture, he came over to me and said, we sponsored a show for you, along with two other people from Quincy, Jean Fletcher, who was a very, very wealthy white woman in Quincy, and then Irene Luchtro, who became really a really good friend of mine, who also helped me. And he said, you guys didn't sell very much, you and Tim didn't sell very much, so he said, I told him each one of us have to buy a work. We were just teenagers, we were kids. He said, and I bought one, Jean Fletcher bought one, and Irene bought one. And he said, and I ended up buying 16 of your paintings. And I had no idea that he had bought all my paintings because, you have to understand, I was trying to figure out how, whether I could go into art, make a living at this, go to college or anything. And this gentleman just stepped out and just bought my work. That was a huge thing for me as a kid to get that kind of support. So I wanted to talk about him because, a lot of times when I tell my story, there's so many layers of complexities to telling your journey. And the number of people who have helped me has been just across the board, and it's been tremendous. And I always want to try to, pay homage to people who've helped me, because I think that's very, very important. This is in Panama City. My mother was home one summer. She worked in Norfolk, Virginia at the time. She was a dietitian and she was home. And she knew I was interested in art. And so she said, there's a competition in Panama City. I said, really? She said, yeah, it's in the Gaston County Times. I said, really? I said, and I read it and I said, well Mama, that includes too many artists. I'll never even get anything. She said, well, why don't you just try, baby? You just try and see if you'll get in it. So I did. I sent something in and I won a prize. I went down to the Civic Center in Panama City to receive the award. And when I walked through the door, she says, oh, you're black. No, this is all true. So I just kind of smiled, and she said, "Oh no, no. We're thrilled that you're here. You're the first black person to ever go to our show." And so I won a merit award, and they took a photograph of me, and the next thing I know, I had a lady by the name of Joanne Dickerson, I believe her name was. She was so taken with me that she said, "You're so talented. I'm going to find your gallery. You're so talented. You're so talented." She took me up and down the Panhandle, Port Walton Beach, all these different places. And then finally she said, well, I don't think they want you in the gallery because you're black and they feel they're gonna run away their clientele. So she said, I know a black couple owns a bar, so this is at the Safari Lounge in Panama City. They opened up their bar and we put easels up and people came in and they purchased my work. And so the next picture here is of Zotan, the gentleman with the tie on, his name is Zotan. That's his son Andrew. That's Andrew, that's me in the middle, of course, and then that's Zotan on the end. The way this happened, this gentleman owned a gallery. He had just moved up from Miami. And so Joanne said, there's a new gallery in town called Bayard and Frank. Why don't we go over there and see if they'll do a show for you or handle your work? And I go in, he sees my work, and he decides that he wanted to do my first show based on the fact that I won that award. And so he said, people are somewhat familiar with you already. He said, just bring your work in and I'll frame it, and you come up for the opening, and we'll do it that way. So the thing about it is, you know, Quincy was a good 2 hours away, so I had to get on a Trailway bus, and they let me stay at their home, too. They let me stay at their home. And believe it or not, we came to open up the gallery on a Saturday. There were a couple of lots of people lined up to buy my work, and I was just a kid. So I've had a lot of help along the way from different people with different backgrounds. This is me doing a workshop here in the gallery, so I would do a workshop where people would come in and watch me paint, which I thought was kind of a ridiculous kind of thing, I'll be honest with you. The first time I heard about this was, I was home and the lady called and said that they wanted to pay me $10 an hour to teach a class. And I was working at the local canning center, so I told my Uncle Ben, my grandmother, my mother's brother, I said, Uncle Ben, nobody's gonna pay me $10 an hour. It's a lot of money just to watch me paint. He said, yeah. She said, she's gonna call back, and she did. And I couldn't believe they were paying me $10 an hour to sit there and actually paint and draw for people. So I did a number of those to help support me. This is in Kansas City. Now, I went to school at the Columbus College of Art and Design, and I graduated and I got a job at Hallmark Cards as an illustrator. I was only there for 3 years before they let me go. They fired me, and part of that firing was a result of my entering competitions. When I first got to Hallmark Cards, they said it was fine as long as I could enter as many shows as I wanted. As long as I didn't work for a competitor, I could do whatever I wanted in terms of fine art. Well, one of the first shows I entered when I was in Kansas City was called the T.H. Saunders International Arts and Watercolor Competition, held in London, England. And I saw an ad in the American Arts magazine about it. Top prize was $2,000. At this time I had about $300 in my account. I decided to enter it. Now my supervisor said, oh, Xerox the form and see if anybody else was interested in it. Well, nobody else entered it. I couldn't really understand it. I entered it, and maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks later, I get a letter saying I've been accepted. Now I only had $300 in my account. I never had anything really professionally framed that I actually paid for. So I took the pain to get it framed. $100 to get it framed. Now I got to take it and try to figure out how to ship it. Take it to the post office, and it's over $100 to ship it. So now I got less than $100 in my account. So I'm thinking, maybe this ain't a good idea. You know, I've been working at Hallmark for a good 3 months here to say that. So I'm thinking, maybe this ain't a good idea. So I take the chance, I ship the painting anyway. Another few weeks pass, I get a letter back, top prize, $2,000. I was 23 years old. And that's what led to my firing. I kept entering these shows and I was winning a lot of awards, and finally Hallmark let me go. When I first got there, they loved me, but apparently the competitions were a conflict of interest according to them.
Oh, wow.
This is at this was called the Vista Hotel. At this time, I had found some representation in Kansas City at a gallery called the American Legacy Gallery. And I was married at that time, and my wife took my work in, and they decided they wanted to handle my work. And I didn't realize at the time, again, it's the first black artist they ever represented. And I did okay the first time they sold some work.
After about 6 months work, I made about $700 because they paid for the framing, then they took 40% commission. So the sales, I wound up with $700. And I thought, this is not gonna work. I gotta figure out something else. So I did illustration work, I did other things to supplement it. One of those illustrations was the Great Kings and Queens of Africa. I don't know if you're familiar with that series put up by Budweiser. I was one of the illustrators who did one of those jobs. But I did a number of other jobs as well, including something that, for the Martin Luther King Center, I did something for them at one time, for 7-Up, I believe it was. But this particular gallery that was handling my work, when I did another show, the second time I tried to raise my price slightly. No one would buy a thing. So I realized, oh, there's a ceiling in terms of what people are willing to pay me for. So I got to figure out something else. So at this time, I told Jack, I don't know if this is going to work out, because whenever I was on a show, they would say, well, who's Steve Mitchell? Well, who's Steve Mitchell? The black guy. The black guy. The black guy. So, and all his audience were all white. There was nobody black walking in these galleries painting. So I said, Jack, you know, and they were very nice people, don't get me wrong. But I said, this is not going to work for me. I've got to figure out something else. You know, and so he said, well, you know, there's this hotel coming up and da-da-da-da-da. Got this mural job. I think this may help you out some. And I said, what's the job? He said, it's a mural. They need it in 7 weeks. I said, well, how big is it? 4 feet by 140 feet.
Wow.
Yes. So this is me working on this thing. And I did complete it in a 7-week span, but it almost killed me. But I needed the money. I was so desperate for the money. So I put this in because a lot of times, you know, I did start getting known. You remember the shows I told you I entered, you know, when I was a kid? Well, the London show, there was the London show. Then there was a show in New York that I won top prize, and a painting got purchased by a university. Then there was another show I entered in California that also won me another $1,000. So these shows that I was entering were becoming very, very lucrative for me. I couldn't sell my work hardly, but I was able to win prize money. So I relentlessly entered shows. You see that metal frame there on that painting? I had metal frames in which I would switch paintings out of, because I couldn't afford a metal frame. I would switch paintings out and put another painting in and send to another show and rotate them in that manner. And so I was just winning a lot of prize money. And next thing I know, American Artist Magazine came knocking. I don't know if you were familiar with American Artist Magazine. They came knocking around 1987, I believe it was, wanting to do an article on me because I was the artist who was winning these top prizes and not showing up to receive them. First of all, I didn't go number one, because I couldn't afford it. If I went, then the money that I needed to support myself would get spent in airfare and sent in a hotel and so forth. And also too, I heard so much from older artists about race that I felt like, okay, how can I level the playing field where I can move forward? Right. What if they don't know what color I am? Right. Will they look at just the work? Is it any good? Will they just look at the work? It wasn't that I was not proud of being who I am, of my color, but I realized that those were those barriers. So I stayed back. And so the next thing I know, American Artist Magazine came knocking and they wanted to do an article. A lot of my friends said, hey man, I'll do the article, no photo. So I wrote them back and I said, hey, I want to do the article, but no photo. Steve Doherty at the time said, no dice, we need a photo. So I was like, man. I said, okay, and I sent them a photo. And they ran an article, and it was a very, very generous spread. It shows some of my African-American figure work. It also shows some of the Caucasian figures that I've done from the Renaissance Festival that I've become involved with because I was an instructor at the Kansas City Art Institute. I was teaching a live new drawing class, and they did a fundraiser at the Renaissance Festival. So I did a lot of festival type things that really won a lot of different awards. So. And the thing about it is, once they ran that magazine article, I got my first museum invitation because of that one article. But it was in a place called Poplar Bluff, Missouri. And I was dating a young lady at the time, and I told her father, and he was like, a museum invited him to do a show? Really? Where is it at? I said, Poplar Bluff. He said, boy, you can't go down there talking about doing a show. That's Klan territory. I said, Mr. Franklin, I don't care where it's at. I'm doing the show. And I called the museum and I made the arrangements, and they said, well, it's cost too much money to get the work down here. We don't know if we can handle it. We have a small budget. I said, no problem. I'll drive the work. That's why you see this. I drove my work. Wherever they said they didn't have the money, because I knew what that was about. They can't find the sponsors.
Right.
So I drove the work. New York, Connecticut, wherever I would drive it. Denver, didn't matter. I got on the road and drove. And sometimes I would pack between 100 to 150 paintings in a truck. This is me in Atlanta, actually, with Mrs. King, and I think this is the president of 7-Up. I showed this because, you know, a lot of times, you know, when I was trying to, you know, find a way to get known, I thought, well, maybe it's because the black people just don't know who I am or anything. And when I got this job, I thought, wow, I'm in Atlanta, and nothing, but nothing really happened within nothing. It didn't go anywhere. In terms of support base, is what I'm saying. But it was great to meet her, and you know, it was a great experience for me. So I don't want anybody to get that wrong. It was a wonderful experience for me. This is my mom and I at the American Watercolor Society. I don't know if you know much about the American Watercolor Society, but it is formed in 1866. Now, I didn't know much about the American Watercolor Society until I was in college. I had a professor who encouraged me to enter the American Watercolor Society. He said, it's tough to get in it. He said, but I think you're really getting good at this. You should give it a shot. Well, I entered it. I entered the painting in the show when I was a student, and I got in. Well, here's the kicker. I entered the same painting in the Student Society of Illustrators, and it got in the Student Society of Illustrators as well. Not a good thing to do to enter the same painting in two different competitions. Well, I assumed that it would never get in the American Watercolor Society, and it didn't. And so I told the professors, well, my painting's going to the American Watercolor Society. And they got into a huge debate about where it was going. I said, it's going to the American. I hear that's an important show. I mean, great for the student thing, but I had to copy my own work. There were two paintings on display during the time. And it was my first time I'd ever got on a plane, was paid by my college because I won an award. And so we went to see my work hanging at the National Academy when I was a student. But this is my mom, where I had won the gold medal. I was a member by then. I have won that gold medal 3 times. I am the only artist in history of color who has ever won their gold medal. 3 times, all African American figurative works.
You like Muhammad Ali?
This is my dear friend Rowena. This was my first. This is Rowena at her latter part of her life. She's just about ready to pass almost. A friend had brought her over. She was too weak to get out of the car, so I went and picked her up and lifted her up and brought her in my home, and did some sketches. And this is the result of the painting that I did of her. But I had a great grandma Celie who died when I was very, very young, probably about 6 years old or so. And I remember, I still could see it in my head how my grandmother would hold her mother's hand as she's getting ready to pass. And so if you look at her hand bleeding off of the frame of reference, that is a reason. There's a reason for that. It is wanting you to walk in her space and touch her. But that was my first gold medal. This is me at the Forest Ventura Ranch in Colorado. I got invited, again, by American Arts Magazine to do what they call plein air at Forest Ventura Ranch in Puerto, Colorado. I thought it was a ranch. We got out there, and it's like owning the national park. It was a piece of land that Mountain Forts had bought. Again, I was the only artist of color in that event as well. And we did an exhibition back at Forbes headquarters, where they also bought a painting. This was another show I entered called Art for the Parks. When I first started entering this show, it was $100,000. But by the time I won it, they had cut it in half to $50,000. And this is one of my scenes out of New Orleans, out of the French Quarter. But again, these shows that were popping up, I was again trying to figure out a way to support myself. And these shows just seemed to have been working for me. And you find something that works, you grind it till it doesn't, and then you move on to another. But for whatever reason, they just worked for me. And this is also how critics became familiar with me as well. You start getting newspaper articles and different things. So this particular show was, I believe, in 1990. Now understand, by then, I had probably won maybe 300-400 awards, national and international.
Wow.
So I see this show, and it's called the Hubbard Award for Excellence. Top prize was $250,000. This is in 1990. Now, Bill Cosby had just bought the Henry Tanner for about $250,000 around that time period, which was the highest ever paid for an African-American artist work. And there I was, the only artist of color, 32 years old, competing in this show. And the irony of this is, I thought you could enter this show. Well, you can't enter it. You had to be invited by a curator. So I thought, oh, I'll never get invited to that. And next thing I know, I get a phone call saying they were sending me a package. I opened it up, and there was an invitation. And the artists who were invited were Jamie Wyatt, Henrietta Wyatt Heard, Richard Estes, Janet Fish, some of the best realists in the country. I called my mother so nervous. I'm trying to explain to her, and she's like, I don't understand, baby. I said, Mama, I don't even know where Ruidoso is. It's some part of New Mexico. I said, you gotta go with me. And so we go down there to the show, and my mother is floored because the works were for sale, you understand? And my work was hanging between Jamie Wyatt's and Henrietta Wyatt Heard. And my mother kept waving me over. I was talking to someone. She says, I said, I gotta go. My mother's wanting for something. And she said, is that right? I said, well, that's what right? She said, the price. I said, $200,000 for that watercolor? Yes, Mom, that is correct. She said, a watercolor, $200,000. Yeah, Mom. She said, now oil painting is oil painting, right? I said, yeah, Mom, it's oil painting. It's $500,000. Yes, Mom. My house didn't cost $500,000. She said, you mean to tell me that they paying this kind of money for a picture just to put on their wall? I said, yeah, Mom, this is the art world. She said, is he dead? I said, no, Mama, he's alive. He's in the room. And he made a beeline over to us, and we got a chance to meet him, and we went over to Henrietta Wyatt Heard's studio and had a great time with him. But understand, this was mind-boggling for my mother, and I, for that matter. And the painting I entered is the one you see on the screen. This is Rowena. This is an oil painting. Now, at the gala opening, they have a sale, and no one would buy my painting. They look at it, and they would say, lovely, but it doesn't quite fit in my collection.
Right.
It's beautiful, but, you know. And then I heard somebody say, well, does he do anything other than black people? Right? This is really interesting. And my mother was pretty furious. So once the gala had ended, I didn't sell either one of my paintings. Another painting I had, and it was an architectural piece. But they really honed in on Rowena for whatever reason, I'm sure. There probably was a reason, I'm sure. But we go to the Hubbard's home, who was the sponsor of the show. So Mr. Hubbard sits next to me, and he says, you can consider your painting sold. And it was $25,000. It's the most I'd ever charged for a work. He said, my wife, Joan Dale, loves that painting, and we're gonna purchase it. Now understand, the $250,000 prize was to be announced the following evening. So we go to the big gala, and Sam Donaldson was the MC. Well, my painting was in the top 6 for the $250,000. So I sat there, and I whispered to my mother, wow, I can't believe I'm in top 6 of this thing. That's crazy. I said, but there's no way in the world a black man's gonna leave from down here with $250,000. I'll just be honest. I said, wow, I can't believe I'm in the top 6. So the irony of all this, when they called off each artist, 6 of us, Rowena, the painter Rowena, got the biggest applause from the audience. But I thought it was an interesting irony, since no one had the courage to buy it, but it was the audience favorite. It was a puzzling thing to me. I didn't win the top prize, but the gentleman who won it, his name is Howard Turpinning. I don't know if you know his work. He does very romantic Native American historical type imagery, beautifully executed. And Mrs. Hubbard runs over to me and says, oh my goodness, you got a bigger applause than Howard Turpinning. And he's loved down here. Won't that make news? It made news like crazy. It made news like crazy. It's funny. I gotta read this because it's too sweet. I just gotta read it. Now, I may be wrong, but I'll bet you at the last minute, they had to include Dean Mitchell in the list of finalists because everyone I talked to that weekend who knew anything about art instantly brought up the fact that Dean's piece, Rowena, was the finest thing in the show. As I said, I may be wrong, but I think this festive evening would have quickly turned into a lynching party if Mitchell had not at least been a finalist. Anyway, the $250,000 award for excellence ultimately went to Howard Turkman. Yawn. Now, I don't think that he meant that in regards to his artwork, because Mr. Turkman was already getting 6 figures for his work. But the fact that I was even included. And the irony of this also too, someone ran over and offered her twice as much. Taught me about the power of endorsement, the power of wealth, the power of money. I thought, wow, this is more than just culture. There's also commerce involved. There's layers of complexities and all this stuff. So, which you have to understand, I'm getting a full education here. Class, education, imagery, and it's just funny how all this works out because I brought the painting back and I showed the painting at the Bruce R. Watkins in Kansas City. And a young gentleman said, well, I can see how white people like your work because it reminds them of someone who cooked for them, who waited on them. And I thought, wow, the dynamics of an imagery. White people didn't exactly want it either. And then the black person thought it reminded them of somebody that's sort of like this I don't know, this mammy figure or something. And I thought, wow, this is really, really interesting to me. I didn't quite get the correlation. I thought, wow, this is my grandmother. I remember people like Rowena with their hats, and this is how they celebrated themselves. And I thought, wow, the dynamics in how people see an image I grew up in the South with, these women were not, I remember Going with the Wind and how that dynamics played into the sensibility of that imagery. But I didn't grow up like that. These women that I grew up were strong. And this woman, Rowena, touched a lot of people's lives. And she was a very spiritual woman. And sometimes that's all people had to lean on sometimes. My grandmother was God. That's all she had to lean on, that there was something better, that there is something watching what's happening on this planet. And to hear that from a young black man, I was really, you have to understand, I was really puzzled. And I had a conversation. It ended well, but I was just really mesmerized by how even class and culture plays a role in that sensibility as well, even amongst us as people of color. I threw this in because at this time I was getting more known, and a lot of the mainstream magazines were highlighting my work and putting on covers and different things. This I put in because I was with a publisher called the Grange Workshop. Grange Workshop found out about me after Art for the Parks and, of course, the Hubbard Show. And they wanted to do these limited issue prints. And some of these artists were making a lot of money from these offset, lithographic prints. And this company picked me up. And I was the first artist of color he picked up, but they couldn't figure out how to market me. So I said, Mr. Usher, how about doing a book? He said, a book? I said, yeah, for your dealer base. And I would go to they would have these big conventions, and they would have all their dealerships. Not a single African-American dealer, not a single dealer. Would show my work, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, a range of work. Well, do beautiful work, but we don't know what we're going to do with this black art. Black art? This is interesting. It said, so I'm doing landscapes and still life, but it's black art. So this is really puzzling to me. I'm like, because I'm black, it's black art. It's very confusing to me. You gotta say this is very confusing to me. And so I thought, oh my God, this is really a can of worms. So I asked Mr. Usher about a book. He wouldn't do a book. I did my own book. I did my own book 27 years ago. Yeah, myself. But I said, well, Mr. Usher, film is nothing more powerful than television. How about we figure out how to do something with television? He said, well, that's not a bad idea. So he decided we're going to do this mini documentary. Now, like I said, I don't know if you're familiar with an artist named Thomas Blackshear, but this is Thomas Blackshear and I, Billy D. Williams. Now, the way all this happened was they did a half an hour on Thomas Blackshear and a half an hour on me. And they could not get PBS to take it. PBS would not take this story. So the producers said, we need some star power. I know Billy D. Williams, let me call Billy D. Billy D gets on board and said, I'm on board, but I want 20 minutes too. So we each got 20 minutes. But PBS picked it up. Again, the power of celebrity. That documentary aired, and I get a call from Ashford and Simpson.
Hey, solid as a rock.
They saw the piece and wanted to know how was I on PBS, and nobody in the black community had ever heard of me. I called Oprah, I called Maya, I called the Studio Museum. Nobody's ever heard of you. And how are you on PBS with Billy D. Williams? And she said, we got your number from a museum in Tampa, Florida. I said, oh, the African American Museum? I said, yeah, you probably got it from Deirdre Beebe. I said, because we tried to get a show with her and it didn't quite work out. And she said, oh, you ever in New York? And I said, yes, my mother lives right outside of there. So we did some at her home, and that's how I got thrusted into the celebrity world, where I met Maya Angelou and a whole bunch of other people. And she asked about a painting in that particular documentary. And I said, oh yeah, somebody purchased it. She said, oh really? She said, who? I said, someone from New York who saw the same program you saw. She said, oh really? And the first thing come out, she said, well, was she black? And I said, were they black, the purchasers? I said, no, they weren't. She said, they were white. I said, yes. She said, but this was a painting of a black woman. I said, yes. How much was the picture? $30,000. $30,000, she says. I said, yeah. I said, and I said, yes. I said, that's what I tried to explain to you. I'm in mainstream. You know, I said, most black people don't know much about me. I said, because the publications I'm in, they don't pick them up. They don't read them. The shows I enter, they're unaware of them. So I said, most of the people who collected my work have been white people. I have a few black people who have, but most have been white people. Economic power gives you the control. Now, the reason I say this is because, you know, during my developing years, I saw very few books on artists of color. Very few. The only thing I would see for the most part about artists of color was in Ebony magazine. They would do an article called 15 leading black artists or 15 top black artists. It's like, how's all that work? Because I was trying to figure, how do I get to a black community? You know, and at that time we had been on, Thomas and I had been on Ebony Jet Showcase. We've been on Ebony Jet Showcase. But I realized that maybe we're not getting known because nobody will publish books on us. They won't write about us. So the publisher didn't want to do a book on me because they figured the book wasn't sold by a black artist, so I decided to do it myself. At this time I had a gallery that was selling my work pretty well in Manhattan, Kansas. And by this time I had developed what they call a collector base. I pre-sold the concept to my collector base. I brought in $35,000 before I put pen and ink to design the thing. It cost me about $70,000 to do the book. I put the other 40 with it myself because I save. I'm a big saver. But what I realized from doing that book, at this time, I had a gallery in New Orleans that had picked my work up. And he picked my work up after he saw me in the Hubbard show because of the magazine covers I got. And that magazine crossed his desk. I knew Brian Galleries years before because I entered a show in Jackson, Mississippi where I won the top prize. I went down to a workshop and a lady named Sandra Williams took me over to Brian Galleries. And every single painting was sold. And they were all watercolors. $30,000, $18,000, $20,000. Every single painting. I could barely get $1,000 for a full sheet. I left out here with deer in the headlights. I said, Miss Williams, how? She said, yeah, you're just as good. I said, yeah, but I can't even. I said, how is that? She said, because he's with Brian Galleries. And I said, but that's all she kept saying. I said, well, what does that mean? She says, Dean, he's wealthy. He has the ears of the collector. I was like, wow, so it matters who sells it?
Right.
Yes, it matters who endorses it and who sells it.
Right.
So I thought, oh my God, wow. So you look up, years have passed, this man calls me up after seeing my work in a magazine and says he would like to represent me, but he wanted an exclusive. I said, Mr. Allen, I don't give anybody an exclusive. Boom. He hangs the phone up. I was like, wow, he's hung up. Okay. Wow. Another year passed, he sees me in 2 or 3 more magazines. Calls me up. Brian Allen from Jackson, Mississippi, I'd like to represent your work. What's it going to take? So, Mr. Allen, a handshake. That's what it's going to take. It's okay. Let's do a show in Jackson, Mississippi. You do a show in Jackson, Mississippi. I go down and fly to the opening. Nobody hardly comes out. He's confused. His wife is confused. Nobody's showing up hardly. Made us sold one small little thing. He's pacing the floor. He must have wore a hole in that floor. Pacing back and forth. You're a great artist. I don't know why the collectors. He probably knew why the collectors didn't show up, but he never said it. But I said, Mr. Allen, it's okay. I've been down this road plenty of times. It's okay. It's all right. He said, no, you're a great artist. We're going to move your work to New Orleans. We're going to sell you. We're going to move you to New Orleans. And I said, by the way, Mr. Allen, I'm working on a book. He said, a book? Art books don't sell. He said, I did a book on an artist, Donnie Finney. He said, I still got a bunch of them in my warehouse. I said, could you send me a copy of it? Sent me a copy of it. I looked at the design and the layout. I said, well, no wonder it didn't sell. It wasn't done very well. I would dare tell him that, of course. So I sent him my book. I sent it to my publisher. They both called me and said, well, who did the book? I said, did you look at the table of contents? Mr. Usher, the publisher. Mitchell Studios. I said, yeah. He said, is this the book you were talking about a year or so ago? You were going to do it? Yes, sir, it is. And I said, what was the first thing he said? Where are you going to get the money? Because that's usually how people hold you back is, where are you going to get the money? Money, come on. So, wow, this is beautiful. How many can I get at cost? None, Mr. Usher. You got to pay full price for my book. Need about a single book for his collector base, for his dealership. But everybody on his staff bought my book. Sent to Mr. Allen, Brian Gallagher, for handling my work. Who did your book? I did it, Mr. Allen. Did you look at the table of contents? Mitchell, this the book. Oh, it's beautiful. How many can you get in New Orleans? I said, as many as you want. I got 3,000 of them in my garage. I can't even park my car. So you have as many as you want.
Do me the favor.
Here's the irony to this story. I sent him to New Orleans. You know, Mr. Allen was selling okay here or there. My sales went through the roof. It went through the roof because you have to understand, by this time, I was 40 years old. I had won so many awards, I could use all of that as part of my entry into the art world. That I really didn't know what the art world was exactly, but I could list all my awards, who collected it. Now I could tell my story, where I'm from, how I grew up. Now I'm a personality to someone. And my work was selling. I said, and I started sending my African American images. They were selling too. I could barely sell them. They were I called Mr. Allen because I was confused. 30, 40, 50,000, 60,000, 70. They were selling. Everything he was selling it like crazy. And I said, well, who's buying it? He said, they're buying it all over the world, dude. I was like, you're kidding me. And I'll tell you guys, I was so scared that, I worked like crazy because I said, I don't know when this gravy train is going to end because I don't know if it's going to last. This is the Grange Workshop. Again, they were trying to get me known in the African American community. Someone knew Rosa Parks. So the Grange Workshop tried to get a connection there to get me to do a painting of Rosa Parks, which I was definitely interested in because of who she was. And, you know, I have always been interested in that kind of narrative. It's the kind of thing that I love celebrating. But again, politics, money just got derailed, didn't go anywhere. But they were trying everything. This painting is in the Idle George Museum of the American West. This is my second book on watercolor. The first book was called Dean Mitchell earlier. I brought a copy up here. I should have brought it up and show you. But that book, the first book, made me so much money, I was able to do a second book because artists were buying my book. I had a large following of artists because all the shows out here and I won all these prizes. I took out a little ad in the Artist magazine, and I got a bunch of people ordering my book who were artists. I didn't realize I had a large following of artists. So I made so much money off of the book, I decided to do a book strictly on watercolor. So I did a book on watercolor only. So this is my second book. I wanted to put this in because everybody kept saying I wasn't known, so I had people were reaching out in my behalf that I didn't even know who were reaching out on my behalf. We wrote Ebony magazine, I wrote them once, and then somebody else wrote them. But I got a nice warm letter, they weren't interested. Even after I sent them an article in Southwest Art magazine about the Rowena and the Hubbard show, they had a big spread on my work, they were not interested. But I wanted people to know that trying to get known as an artist of color is very, very, very complex. It's not very simple. But we were just reaching and trying. I was trying everything.
Right.
This is called New Nap. This is an oil painting. This painting was in a show in Denver, Colorado, at a show called Artists of America. Again, the only artist of color in this show. And I got invited to this show because of the Hubbard show in Ruidoso. A gentleman ran over to me after I was a finalist and said, "We're doing a show at Artists of America. Are you familiar with it?" I said, "No, I'm not familiar with it, sir. I have no idea what that is exactly." So I get invited to that show. Top realist artists are selling work like crazy in the genre of realism. And the irony of this is, after that show, there was a critic that came in for the Denver Post. She highlighted my work and compared me to some of America's greatest painters. And the next thing I know, she called me up and said, "I write for the Christian Science Monitor. I'd like to do an article on you." And this was a double-page spread that came out, How Dignity Colors a Canvas. This article crosses the desk of K-State University president in Manhattan, Kansas, where I also had a gallery that represented my work. They were building a new museum called the Beach Museum of Art. And she saw this article and wanted to know if I was the same artisan that was showing in Manhattan, Kansas, would I be willing to open up the museum as the inaugural exhibition? And I was like, wow. That one article made that connection. This is Crosby Kemper. Crosby Kemper is he's now deceased, was one of America's top 100 collectors. He was one of the patrons of this museum. So at that gala, he came to the show. He came to the show along with a lot of founders of Pizza Hut. There was a lot of money. Dale Chihuly was there because Dale did the chandelier. And he said, "Is this your work?" I said, "I'm just looking at this." He said, "Oh my God, do you have a New York dealer?" "No, sir, I do not have a New York dealer." "Oh God, you need a New York dealer." He just went on and on about the work. And he said, "Oh my God, Bibi," and his wife was like, "Well, Crosby, you're gonna buy some, aren't you? You bought about 4 or 5 paintings out of the show." Then he bought a painting of my uncle who was dying of cancer that I had in the show that a collector returned it because he said he couldn't live with it. He had it hanging in his office, couldn't live with it. He returned it to me. And I got the painting back, and it was in this show. And Mr. Kemper bought it for the museum collection. But he became a big supporter. This was one of the first shows I had at an African American museum, was at the Jazz Museum in Kansas City. And the way that happened was a show that was coming there got canceled. And so they didn't know anybody who could fill the room other than me, who really produced the work. So they reached out to me. Unbeknown to me, I already knew, because they wrote Mr. Kemper to sponsor because they didn't have enough money to put the show on. So they wrote a letter because they knew that he was a collector of mine, and wrote him to sponsor the exhibition. And so that's him at the exhibition. This is Bob Ragland. He's from Denver. Remember the show I was telling you about Artists of America? Well, Bob called me up. He said, "You don't know me. My name's Bob Ragland." He said, "I don't want nothing. I just want you to know I saw you in the lineup." I said, "You saw me in the lineup? What kind of lineup are you talking about?" So he said, Artists of America. I said, "Oh, yeah, the art show." He said, "Yeah, I want to meet you when you come out." And this is Bob Ragland in his studio. When we get there, when I first showed my work at the the Rotary show and at the Denver show. He tells my mother, he doesn't tell me. Your son ain't gonna sell his work, he says. He won't sell it. He wants too much for it. He wants what they want. He won't sell it. They won't buy it. And he was right. So I said, okay, I got something for that. I'm gonna do a small painting, but it's gonna be packed with composition, clarity of brushwork. Everything will be on point. Just smaller. I always sold that. Pay for my cost. So it wasn't out of pocket. But you understand, had I thought about money, I wouldn't be sitting here. Wouldn't have gotten the Christian Science Monitor article or any of that would have happened for me. I had to let go of the idea that I was going to make any money, but I was already told I wasn't going to make any money by my mother. So, but this painting of Bob Raggins in the studio, this is my second gold medal at the American Watercolor Society. And I did it because I felt like Bob was a dear friend. I felt he was a great artist and wasn't getting the recognition I thought he needed. And so I thought I wanted his name known, so I did a painting of him, and I entered in the American Watercolor Society because I wanted him to be known, more known, so he could support himself. So I wanted him in the studio to show the intelligence and the creative space that he lived in. That won the gold medal, and I'm telling you, man, that lifted that guy's spirit so much. I can't even tell you. And he started charging more for his work. He was telling double. So, great story. This is another article, Mitchell Explores the Soul with Intelligence and Sensitivity. I did a show at Portfolio Gallery. Now, there were very few galleries that were African-American owned, but Portfolio was one of them. And top prize sometimes, or prize that he would give out would be $500. And he would get a lot of sponsorship from Anheuser-Busch. But I wanted to show this because a lot of times, a lot of shows that my major support came from mainstream white galleries. And it wasn't that I wasn't in the African American community because I got criticized for not being enough in the African American community. I was in the African American community. I could not find a consistent support base, and neither could they. They would have their openings, people would come out, and no one would buy anything. So, but anyway, this talks about Robert, where the show was, and I wanted people to know that I did show in a lot of African American galleries because I got criticized. Because the more you get known, you start being a target. For some people who don't know your story, they don't know the areas of complexities to it or anything what goes into this. This is Robert. This is at Robert's home. A lot of times they would do things at their home to try to introduce you to collectors who may be interested in your work. This is Mrs. Allen. This is Doris Allen. This is at Bryant Galleries. And I tell you, I was very successful in New Orleans, and sometimes it would be mind-boggling. I would go to the openings, and sometimes the work is almost sold out before I even hit the floor. People calling on the phone. It was, I don't know, it scared the crap out of me, but I was happy about it, but I didn't know how long it would last. But they're really sweet people. This was somebody that I didn't know was writing in the Studio Museum in Harlem. This was written in 1997, asking them to consider my work for an exhibition of some sort. And then she says, I hope you don't mind I did this. No response from the Studio Museum in Harlem. No response. This is in New Orleans. This is after Katrina hit. I would scrounge around in New Orleans and I would do a lot of the buildings because it has a rich, deep history there. This is another letter from a gentleman. His daughter was going to Tulane University, and his name was Augustus Brown. He's an art historian. He wasn't familiar with me, so his daughter called him up and was telling him about it. He said, well, he was that good, I'd know something about him. He was really that good. And he comes down there and he gets really enthralled with me. He wants to do some virtual reality thing. And he wrote this letter to me about doing this virtual reality. And just so happened, the economy went bust, and he wanted to use my paintings of New Orleans and take people through the doorways and the different buildings I was doing into the culture of New Orleans. But again, the grant money. Again, didn't happen. This is in East Orange, New Jersey. My mother moved there for a while and worked at a VA hospital, and I would often do paintings in that area. I was always pretty enthralled with the urban core. Now this series is I got invited to these shows out west at the Gene Archer Museum in Los Angeles, and one at Oklahoma City called pt1 West that I'm in, that's getting ready to open early part of June. I've been in it for close to 20 years. For a long time I was the only artist of color. They now have Tom Blackshear in it. And a lot of times these shows I'm in, I'm usually the only person of color, and very few people, no black people walk through the door buying anything. But I was really kind of curious about, I was in one show called West Select at the Phoenix Art Museum. And a friend of mine who knew me from Kansas City said, "Hey man, while you're down here, you want to go to the Native American reservations?" I said, "Reservation?" He said, "Yeah, let's check it out." So I went over, and I couldn't believe that people live like this still. It reminded me of the rural South where I grew up. So I became very captivated by this space. And I said, but they're still painting them with, with the native gear and all this stuff. I thought, these people I was really confused, and I was trying to figure out, I was really thrilled that they invited me to be part of these shows, because these were great museums. They're beautiful museums. They have great patronage. But I said, God, I don't really paint cowboys and Indians like that. I mean, how do I find my place in this? And then I landed on something, just by a friend taking me over there. And I said, ooh, this has substance to me. I want to paint this. And the first time I presented the Native American reservation, they just walked by me like they were ghosts. This was not something they wanted to see. And I was okay with that, And some people bought one here or there, but I realized that it set a tone of discomfort, because we have romanticized their history so much through movies and television and different things. I wanted to engage this space, because how are these people living this way? Not all of them, but how are these people living this way? What did I do? I did something here. What did I do? Sorry. But I got so taken with the space. I got so taken with the space, I did an entire series on the reservation, Native American reservations. This is another one called Trailer Park Scatter. But you have to understand, I grew up around this type of imagery, so this kind of thing spoke to me. And so I felt like, wow, this is something I really feel like I can address as an American painter. And I did get another little blurb in the Chris Science Monitor about the work. And I realized that this history is linked to this. This marginalization is linked to this. This was one painting I did too out west. I entered a show at I believe it's the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody. I got top prize, which was a $20,000 prize, and the museum bought the painting for $10,000, so $30,000 prize. So I told my wife, I got to go to this thing. So we go out, and a very nice museum. And when I walk in, a lady said, I think she was really kind of taken aback, because people of color walking in this Western museum, and she says, I said, oh, I'm an artist. She said, oh. She said, well, maybe one day you'll be good enough to be in one of these in the show. You'll be good enough to be in the show. So I said, yes, perhaps, yeah. And by this time, the curator runs over and said, oh, I see you met our top winner. It was so endearing. She just laughed. I just laughed. I said, it's okay. It's okay. It's not a problem. I'm used to it. So, this is a tobacco barn. This is, funny. I did a lot of this when I was a kid growing up, because I worked in tobacco. I worked in shade tobacco as a kid, and so I did a number of these paintings because, first of all, a lot of times the people who worked in them were mostly black people. They were black women who would sew the tobacco on a slat and put it up in the barn, hang it in the barn, and it would dry it out. I worked in this as a kid. So, and I did a number of them. And it's funny, I thought I was not gonna do any more barns because I'd done enough of them when I was a kid, but I was much older and I went back as a more mature man. So the space spoke to me in a different way than it did when I was younger. And I think that the people who owned it romanticizes it. I have no romanticism with barns whatsoever. This one is called Tobacco Wealth in the Weeds. Tobacco Wealth in the Weeds. There is a certain kind of, at this time I was looking at a lot of abstract work by Motherwell and Franz Klein and different artists. In this painting, though you can see the illusion of a barn, it is quite abstract in terms of the energy of the space itself. But what really fascinated me about this particular structure in this space was the way nature was consuming it and almost devouring it. You know, and in some way I saw time passing, but also my own mortality also woven into the space. So whenever I'm interested in painting something, there is a purpose and a reason, because there is something, I don't always just look at a structure as just a building. It is people's way of life is woven into these things. This is titled, I Am Mr. Northern. Part of my reason for titling that was because, I don't know if you remember, I am a man. I used to walk around with these signs on the right from me. And the Mr. is because they used to refer to black men as boy. So I am Mr. Northern. If you look at him, how he sits, there's a certain kind of posture and a certain kind of energy and a certain kind of power that radiates from it. It is not a passive image whatsoever. He commands that space, though it is ruled, though it is not what we would call a comfortable living in the modern world. I can tell you, walked in this home, it was immaculately clean. Everything in its place. He had guns hanging over his bed. He was a hunter. But there was a certain kind of power and energy that was raw and real to me, because I grew up with these kind of people encouraging their kids to get an education, to get a better life. This was the kind of power that I grew up with. Were they wealthy? Were they of the elite society of Black America? No, they were not. But they were power brokers in their own right. And I tell you, I fell back a lot on that when I was going through different challenges of trying to be an artist and a painter, because I can tell you, I knew money was not going to sustain me. I had to find a deeper reason for doing what I was doing. Otherwise, I was not going to be able to continue, because there were so many obstacles.